Hi everyone, it's Raina. So this video is for the full moon in Libra, which is occurring, at least where I live, on April 7th at 9:36 p.m. Central Standard Time. So if you live in Europe and down under, places like that, you're going to see it on the 8th. And I found out that the 8th is actually Buddha's birthday. I've seen April 8th and May 8th as Buddha's birthday, so that's pretty cool. You guys are lucky. So I'm going to be talking about what is coming to fruition, what is heightened emotionally at that time. But I want to kind of like back up a few days because there are some other things that are happening in the beginning of April, and I'm recording this on April 3rd, that you might be interested in hearing about. So this is kind of leading up to that full moon. And one of them is that Venus is now in Gemini. And one of the things that, before I continue, I just want to give a shout out to cafeastrology.com because they provide some of the transits that are up and coming for the month. And I just kind of perused their information. I don't do that very often because I don't deal with this as a topic for the whole. I'm usually just looking at the ephemeris and doing individual signs. And I've already done astrology readings for all the signs of the zodiac for April. So if you check my channel, you'll be able to find that playlist. But I wanted to talk about the full moon in Libra, especially given the times that we are in, because there does seem to be something that we are kind of going towards that is building up. And some people talk about Easter, and I'm going to be watching a video tonight where somebody talks specifically about Easter. And there are other types of energy readers. I like Magenta Pixie, and some of you may know who she is, but there are other people out there who talk about certain times as being portals or just very special in our evolution or ascension process, if you will. And so I haven't done full moon or new moon readings in a long time, and somebody asked me if I was going to do anything about the specific situation. So what I'm going to be doing is a tarot reading for what we have been dealing with in terms of whatever you want to call it, a shutdown and that sort of thing, and maybe some key ideas that we can kind of look at, and just kind of like a spiritual teaching, if you will. And I'll probably use tarot cards and maybe oracle cards for that one. But this, I just wanted to talk about the astrological energy of this time period. Of course, Easter is on April 12th, and again, it may be different where you are. And so this is a time, this is going to be next week as I record this, after that full moon in Libra on the 7th. So you have Good Friday on the 10th, and then you have Easter Sunday. Now, even if you are not a Christian, are into some other religion, or you just whatever, this still can be discussed as symbolism for some sort of resurrection in your own life. That's how I think is the best way to deal with it if you don't follow a particular religion. You can still appreciate it for what it is, and especially if there is astrological support that would suggest certain things are happening. Now, getting back to Venus entering Gemini today on April 3rd, one of the interesting things is that when I was looking at cafeastrology.com, they were talking about how Venus in Gemini is very sociable, but they mentioned it may be animated and fun, but also may also keep our distance on an emotional level. The first thing I thought of was social distancing. So, but I mean, actually, people are doing that physically. And what I believe that this is going to do to impact people, and I guess I have to say, limit this to the Northern Hemisphere because we're experiencing the early stages of spring. And I know today it was 67 degrees Fahrenheit, which is really warm for this time of year. And people were out and about, and even when they were keeping a distance, they were still enjoying such perfect weather. And I think that this is just kind of like an extension of that because it's very social. People who don't want to, who are social to begin with, may feel like really pent up when they can't be with others, but at least they might talk to them if they're not seeing them in person. And Gemini is very much like talkative and enjoying just lighthearted, amusements and things like that. So I feel like this can be really good for communication because Venus brings harmony, and we need that kind of positive news. We need that kind of positive communication at this time. So I see that as like a real bright spot. And because Venus is going into Gemini and the Sun is in Aries, we have this compatible air and fire energy happening. And actually, let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to talk about before then. Just briefly, on the 4th, which is tomorrow, it's in the future as I record this, there's going to be the first of 3 Jupiter conjunct Saturn aspects, and this is going to be really great for making deep and positive change in your life. So, because Jupiter is very much about positivity and your life philosophy, and Pluto, yeah, it can be about destruction, but it's also about, you could say, purification. This combination really is great for people who are trying to regenerate themselves and better their lives in general. And it's very powerful. In Vedic astrology, Pluto is considered a malefic planet and Jupiter is considered a benefic planet. So here they are colliding by being in the same degree and kind of concentrating that energy in the sign of Capricorn. But see, because Capricorn has a very, I would call it productive element to it, being ruled by Saturn, and Saturn being about things that have substance and structure to them, I don't feel that Pluto is really negatively aspected in that sense, where it's, anything that is kind of destroyed is done so purposefully. It's not done just kind of like wanting to just create chaos. Like if Pluto is, I wonder what it's like if Pluto is in Aquarius. I mean, that might be like super duper radical. And you might even think of it as a rebel without a cause. It's just going around tearing everything down. But, I'm going to have to check on that to see what kind of time periods we had Pluto in Aquarius and what was happening on the, global scale. But I think that this can be very beneficial, actually. And on the same day, there is you may have heard about this universal type of gathering. I mean, obviously it's going to be online, and it has to do with 444, because that's what is happening. Some of you may know about angel numbers and repetitive numbers like 1111 and things like that. And 444 is something that I started to write, and or 44 as well. And that is, we're seeing, we had 22. Well, it was like, I'm trying to think, 2020, so that was 2222 in February. And now we have, April 4th. April's the fourth month, and this is a 4 universal year. So 444. And people are going to be meditating as a collective. I'm sure there's more than one group that's going to do this, so you can look on YouTube or just search it online to see when it's going to be for a particular group, if that floats your boat. But I just wanted to kind of mention that as well, because that's going to be on the same day. And as far as I know, it doesn't necessarily, oh no, maybe it does have to do with Jupiter being in conjunction with Pluto. Maybe that's exactly what it has to do with. I watched one of those videos about it, and in some ways it was in one ear and out the other, where I didn't really pay attention to why they were doing it. I know it was because it was 444, but I figured it might have something more than that. But who knows? Maybe that's all they need. So let's talk about. Okay, I'm going to talk about the full moon, but I just want to talk about one more thing that's happening. On the 11th of April, Mercury is going to enter Aries. Okay? Now, as some of you may know, we had Mercury in Pisces, and this occurred, we had a Mercury retrograde in March. And the interesting, well, it was actually from, I believe it was from February. Gosh, now I've forgotten. I think it was from February to early, yeah, it had to be, to about March 9th. But because a planet also has to come out of its shadow, it took until the end of the month for it to fully emerge from its shadow. That's when it goes back to the degree, or transcends the degree, that it was when it retrograded. So that means that it's no longer under the influence, even in a subtle way, from the retrograde. So it's fully moving forward. Well, I would take it a step further and say that April 11th is important, because this is when it enters a whole new sign altogether. The reason that I personally think this is important is because I really felt that Mercury in Pisces was a doozy, and I couldn't really figure out why. And now that I think about it, it might be because Neptune is currently transiting in its own sign of Pisces, and I believe that this heightened a lot of deceptive language and communication, if you will. And it just so happened that all of the shutdown stuff occurred after Mercury went direct, but while it was still in its shadow period. And so I kind of was saying to myself that I thought was kind of interesting that people had to kind of stop what they were doing, almost like it was a retrograde period of a personal planet, especially something like Mercury. And actually in May, we're going to have 3 planets retrograding. So that's going to be quite a month. And April is a time to look at things that you would like to launch. Now, it's supposed to be up until the 9th that you have like the total green light, because on the 9th of April, Venus enters its pre-retrograde shadow. And I personally am not really all that concerned about the shadow period, even though I have witnessed it affecting me to some degree. I'm not I feel that it's too excessive to delay things for such great lengths of time. So I just wanted to bring that up because, in May there are going to be three planets retrograding, and I believe the three are Venus and when Venus is going to be doing it in Gemini, the sign that is entering today on the 3rd of April. So Venus will be staying in Gemini for a lot longer than it normally does. And so there's a significance in this. I mean, it'll be until August 7th. I mean, its usual transit is about, I believe it's 7 weeks. Or no, I think it's less than that. Why am I blanking out on that? It's like Mercury, it's probably about 6 weeks, I would say, through one sign. I just double checked, it's 3.5 weeks. They say 23 days approximately, but because I was thinking of Mercury, and I think they're about the same, and they're very fast moving. Probably Mars is about 2 months, even though Mars is also a personal planet, but that's pretty quick too, But again, with the retrogrades, it can take that much longer. And but the bottom line here is I believe that when Mercury goes into Aries, that it's going to be like a switch has been flipped. And the reason that I say this is that, first of all, Aries is the first sign, and I'm looking at this date, 11, which is like the double pillars and kind of like a portal that one goes through. And actually, if you add up the day of April 11th, 2020, it adds up to a 1. So I feel like it's going to be a new phase, and I think that part of the reason why, well, first of all, we're having a new cycle of Mercury where it's entering the first sign of the zodiac. And in Aries, Mercury is very quick on the uptake. It's very aggressive with its speech, but very blunt, but also very transparent. And so Pisces can be deceptive language and kind of like roundabout language, not direct, indirect, as opposed to direct like Aries. To me, Aries is like an arrow, and I think of Sagittarius, which is my sun sign, and that is the arrow or the archer, who's shooting the arrow to the bullseye of the truth. And to me, all of the fire signs, but especially Aries and Sag, are very blunt, very concerned with the truth. So this is coming on the heels of Easter. What is that resurrection about? And again, coming on, did I say the heels? I mean coming on the cusp of Easter and coming on the heels of the full moon. Only 4 days from, after the full moon, which has brought perhaps its own revelations. So, just to briefly touch upon the full moon in Libra, it's going to be at 18 degrees of Libra. And for those of you who are not aware, a full moon is in opposition to the sun at the time that it is full. And so, especially with these two signs, we are talking about the individual versus the couple, you and another person. So relationship issues can certainly come up, and it's going to be in terms of, I would say, honoring the self. The sun is in what I would say is the moon is in Libra, so that is what is highlighted, is the relationship and bringing up the issues of the relationship. But the sun is the self. I mean, it's in that first house at the time of the full moon, because it's we're in Aries. So it's really looking at, I mean, when I do these, it's always the sun. The sun is always in the first house, and the moon is in the seventh. But in this case, because it actually goes along with the universal chart, that's going to be even more the case. And so at any full moon, there can be, because it is an opposition, there can be relationship issues. But this one is very clearly about individuality and freedom versus the needs of another person. And for some people, they will have the courage to be able to speak about these things, because especially in the aftermath of that, when Mercury goes into Aries, there will be this sense of like, I have to speak my mind, I have to speak my truth, and I can't just be somebody who is always trying to please another person. I have to be true to myself, to thine own self be true. And I want to just talk about a few of the things that are happening here. Venus is actually well aspected. There's a trine between Venus and Mars because they're both in air signs. And Venus, again, is in Gemini, and Mars is at an early degree of Aquarius. So they trine one another, and that means that you have the divine feminine, divine masculine cooperating in harmony, and there's balance there. There is a sense of, if you meet somebody, oh yeah, that was the other thing too. If you meet somebody like, I was reading about it on Astrology, on cafeastrology.com. I think it's like in the next couple of days. If you meet somebody, there's going to be a conjunction with Venus and Saturn, and that's going to be a time when you may meet somebody where you have a very kind of serious relationship. Oh, I wish I could remember where it was. I can't see it now. But anyway, it's I think it's in the next few days. Of course, I could just look at the ephemeris. That would be a real smart thing to do. And let me just double check this. And let's see, Venus and Mars, or Venus and Saturn. That's impossible. It must have been something else. It can't be Venus and Saturn. Oh, a trine. I'm sorry, a trine. Probably around the 10th of April. So it's like on Good Friday, around then. Okay, so if you meet somebody around that time, you may have this sense of like the two of you being very serious about the relationship. It's not just kind of, even though you have Venus in Gemini, and it's usually just flirtatious and just kind of almost a little bit, I don't know, I don't want to use the word shallow, but you know what I mean. It's something that may come across like frivolous or something like that. This could be a bit different. And certainly with the fact that at this full moon we have Venus trine Mars, it's very balanced in terms of romance and kind of that animal passion. Venus is also trining Jupiter at this full moon, which is really great because I always think of the full moon as a time of prosperity. I may have read that somewhere, but it seems like it because it seems like, a pregnancy. And it's a great time for pregnancy too, I think, for conceiving children. But just in terms of bringing in the harvest, that was coming from that new moon in Aries, which, by the way, was the astrological New Year. So that was starting a whole new cycle in and of itself. And being that it was at the time of the equinox, that made it even more of a power period. So, the fruition, the fruits of that. So we have Venus trine Jupiter. So that seems like that's very good for money. And certainly right now, with a lot of things that are going on, not just in the United States, but the world, people are really focused in on the financial angle. So that bodes well in some way for financial prosperity. And just, these are both considered benefic planets. So in terms of their coming together with the trine, which is the easiest manifestation aspect, that could certainly be something that just kind of flows, that you don't have to work at. And it's like, you have the Midas touch, and there's like luck attached to it too. And there's also a trine between Venus and Saturn, and of course so I guess that trine actually extended further back from the 10th, actually to the 7th, because that's when this full moon is. And so again, that's kind of devotion and love, and this sense of, with Saturn, this sense of like it being meaningful. I was going to say structure, and I thought, oh gosh, that sounds like so unromantic. But yeah, I mean, that it has a future, that it has some kind of durability to it, and like a Maytag washing machine. No, I'm just kidding. And there's also another trine between Venus and Pluto. And sometimes, when you see hard angles from Venus to Pluto, there are power plays in the relationship. And this is really about that sense of, to me, the beautiful aspect of control. In terms of, to me, it's more about the self and being able to understand where your power really lies and not have to look for it in somebody else, but also perhaps feeling empowered by somebody else, by their devotion to you, by their appreciation of you. And so that I'm glad that there are so many nice things going on with Venus, because given that Libra is ruled by Venus, that certainly can be a great theme for relationships. And let's see what else. Another great thing is that Mars is in conjunction with Saturn. And it's interesting. There is a square between Mars and Uranus, and this can be very revolutionary. And suffice it to say, we are in interesting times. And you can have breaking news at any moment and that kind of thing. But, and by that point, Mercury is still in Pisces on the 7th. So it has not, that's strange, actually. Well, I think I said something about the 11th, so I guess it's going to move that quickly. In only like 4 days, but whatever. Oh yeah, 1 degree a day. That's not that big of a deal, I guess. So in this time when Mercury is still in Pisces, there may be people who are acting out something, kind of they feel that need to rebel, but they are acting on false information. Disinfo, if you will. So it's very important, even if somebody feels that they are that they're being kind of instigated in some way to like protest or what have you, that they really think twice, because they may be they may be fed lies or half-truths, and they could be going off half-cocked. And it could actually, it's not going to be effective for the revolution, which is what Uranus is concerned with, because there's a square, there's a frustration there. Something is not quite right. The person is acting, but they're kind of like acting out rather than acting with a clear sense of purpose. We're going to have a conjunction between Mars and Saturn. This is actually very good. It's in Capricorn, so there is this possibility of really, doing something that has a sense of purpose and structure attached to it, because not only are these planets in Capricorn, but Saturn rules Capricorn. So it's kind of like that double Capricornian thing going on. And but I also can see that somebody might be fighting tradition or fighting the man, fighting the authority. Saturn is the father, but it's also the authority figure. So again, with that square between I don't know if it'd be fighting against, because it isn't a hard angle, it's a conjunction, but it's, because these are both considered challenging planets, a conjunction can have more of a challenging effect to it. You could say that conjunctions are neutral. They're neither challenging or easy. But in the case of two planets that are both considered challenging, they're concentrating that type of, intensity. But it can be because Saturn represents obstacles, that there is that sort of tension. And then with the square between Mars and Uranus, it's like, and Uranus being so different than Saturn, Uranus being about rebellion and, revolution, innovation, as opposed to tradition, there can be a real contrast there. The last thing I want to talk about are a couple of hard angles, squares. The Sun and the Moon are squaring Jupiter, but they're also squaring Pluto. And so with the Sun squaring both Jupiter and Pluto, we could have people who are narcissistic, egotistical, and blinded by their own, what do they call it? Delusions of grandeur. That they are, trying to do power plays, coming from that place of somehow being entitled. And the Moon, of course, is the emotional nature. With a square to Jupiter, it's over the top, it's exaggerated. And with the square to Pluto, it is really coming from that controlling, manipulative place. And so it's very interesting because we have these wonderful, aspects from Venus to various planets. So you could call it a bit of a mixed bag, if you will. But I think that if somebody is in a relationship that they feel is worth saving, but they feel like there are a lot of things that are unsaid, I think that April will be a time, especially in the aftermath of this, where you may feel the courage to just lay it on the line, because there may have been other things that have gone on that have made you realize that something has to give. And at the time of a full moon, and especially if it's in the sign of relationship, it's like, I've got to get this off my chest. We have to talk about this, because if we don't, we're going to be toast. We're going to be through. And at that point, the person realizes that sometimes you have to risk things in life to get what you want. And that's kind of what, the opposition is all about. When you have like the sun and moon, and opposition when there's a full moon, is kind of like we have to come to this common ground. There's two extremes going on, like a seesaw. And everybody, in both parties, are kind of clinging to their positions, but we have to integrate. And so there you have it. I think I've gone on long enough, almost 36 minutes. So I hope that you have a great, week. This is really, I'm covering until the 11th. So that's like 8 days from now from when I'm doing it. And look forward to my tarot reading, maybe with oracle reading about the current state of affairs. Take care. Bye.